All right, I think we can start with who we have. Psyched that Linus and Irene are here, and happy to be recording this for folks who may watch it later. And I will start out by introducing who's here on the DataHub side. So I'm Eric Van Duzen. I'm Outreach and Tech Lead for Data Science Undergraduate Studies. I've been working in this area for 4 or 5 years. I'm also a lecturer and an instructor, so I use these tools in my class. There used to be a summer workshop, which was how we got some people to come on board, where it was like a boot camp for, instructors to learn how this was going and with Data 8. And I came to that workshop and then I started teaching a connector, and then I became somebody who does outreach to faculty. And I'm also going to introduce Elias Saravia. Elias, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm the modules program curriculum coordinator at the Data Science Undergraduate Studies. I was a developer when I first started, and as an undergraduate with the modules program. I've been working with the modules program for over 2.5 years already. I started off as a developer, then a team lead, and now leading the program. So it's very nice to meet all of you, and looking forward to the rest of this presentation with you.
And Balaji.
Thanks, Eric. Hi, everyone. My name is Balaji Alvar. I'm the service lead for DataHub. So I'm a fairly new addition to the team. I joined this team 6 months back, and I've been working closely with Eric and Elias for these workshops.
And Balaji's position is a new one that we didn't have before. And this is, somebody who's between data science undergraduate studies and RTL. And some of it's like campus, like start, pick up, treating the DataHub as something like we have B courses and Gradescope and other services that campus offers to instructors. So it's really great to have Balaji here this year. He just came online last semester, and he's been working on documentation and a bunch of stuff. So really quickly, we have this vision that these data science tools and this tool set should be available to all students in all disciplines to experience data science. That's kind of why we're here. That's like the passion and the motivation that keeps us like leaning into this project. Is data science shouldn't just be something for people over in engineering. Like data science should be something that everyone can touch. So I just want to say that as our starting point, and we've developed modules across campus and with all sorts of different types of collaborators that come to the table with different types of backgrounds and data science skills.
So what is basically a modules curriculum? Well, that's essentially a laboratory assignment, homework, project, or a lecture that utilizes Jupyter notebooks in order to expose students to data science tools or concepts. So this may include principles of data analysis, interpreting and creating visualizations, statistics, etc. All in the context of the course or domain. In addition, with modules, students have the opportunity to work on a data set that's relevant to their course that achieves the necessary learning outcomes. And some notable collaborations that we've had with the Sociology Department is Sociology 130 AC, Sociology 88, and SOCH 5. And so now to give you an overview of some of our statistics and modules, we've been creating curriculum for over 5 years. And over these 5 years, we have served over 13,000 students, served over 80 courses, created over 250 notebooks, which is quite a number, and served over 40 departments at UC Berkeley, including but not limited to economics, ethnic studies, political science, sociology, biology, you name it. And with the Sociology Department, we have collaborated with them since 2017 and have served over 1,100 students and worked with 3 courses and made approximately 16 notebooks. So yeah, SOCH 5, SOCH 88, and 130 AC, which we'll go over more in detail.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about DataHub. So what is DataHub? DataHub is Berkeley's instance of JupyterHub. It was initially built for Data 8 with the vision that vision of inclusion and accessibility. Any student, irrespective of their background, the kind of courses they take, they can learn data science, they can use DataHub without installing software packages, or can run the workflow in any computers per se. So that was initially when it started, and it is built to be scalable. It was deployed in a 1,500 student classroom, which is Data 8, and DataHub has Data 8 has set of tools for active learning, like instructors could make it an interactive learning experience for students. And the diversity of Data 8 classes could be seen through the connectors, 10 connectors and 15 modules per se. And the whole philosophy is open source, right? That the Data 8 classes have a free textbook and the open source software stack, as you can see with DataHub, the autograder, and the open source curriculum approach. And these tools could be extended to many different classes, as Elias highlighted, like across sociology, across statistics, and so on. Next slide. So I just wanted to briefly talk to you about the history of DataHub over the past 5 years. JupyterHub was the product. It was built by the Project Jupyter team. It was built in 2015, and it was adopted in Berkeley as DataHub. Like we built on top of JupyterHub, DataHub in 2017, and it was first piloted as part of Data 8. And this was a very small class back then, but then the projects like the DataHub started to kick off as many instructors started adopting it. And few instructors who were using R-based workflow wanted to add R Studio as part of DataHub. And the team here at Berkeley added R Studio as part of DataHub and also contributed to the JupyterHub ecosystem. So that's our contribution per se. And in and this is when DataHub started to grow its impact. And in 2019, DataHub was adopted as part of the online course called Foundations of Data, teaching Foundations of Data Science. And there, the DataHub's impact grew beyond Berkeley, where students across the world who sign up for this MOOC could basically run their assignments using DataHub. And in 2020, due to the success that DataHub enjoyed within Berkeley, a group of affiliates from Project Jupyter and Berkeley started this organization called 2I2C with the mission to make open source tools for interactive computing in education and research. And they are currently working with many community colleges and universities in North America, and they are deploying Jupyter hubs there. And as of 2021, the service has reached almost 10,000 plus users. Instructors who use Python, who use R, who use Julia have been using different tools, part of DataHub, to run their classes. So that's in a nutshell of the history, I would say. So I'm going to quickly walk you through some high-level statistics. As you can see in the graph, this is a fall 2021 usage. Initially, DataHub, before the start of the semester, there will be low usage, but during the semester, it enjoys huge usage through the weekdays. And then at the end of the semester, it just tapers off. So we have almost 4,000 plus active users on weekdays during the semester, and almost have more than 10,400 plus users on a monthly basis. And we had almost 60 plus courses across the campus who used DataHub last semester. And I did some basic analysis using the logs data to see how much usage DataHub has. And based on the log data, we could see that students almost have 150 years worth of their time spent in DataHub from 2019. So it doesn't mean that students spent all their time working on DataHub. It is more like they started and closed DataHub, and we use that log data to calculate this number. So I just wanted to share that as a mental model of the usage. Next slide. And finally, this is just a word cloud of all the courses that are using DataHub. As you can see, introductory data science is the introductory data science courses across many different disciplines use DataHub. Biology, public health, economics, and different departments use it, which highlights the usage it has. So before I end, I just wanted to make a plug for a newsletter which we had created. If you're interested to follow or updates about some features that may help you from a pedagogical standpoint, or find instructors who are innovating with regards to their pedagogy using DataHub and other tools. We have started a new newsletter. I'll just share it with you, and you can subscribe to it. If you feel it has useful information. Over to you, Eric.
Great. So there's a couple of ways,
Eric?
yeah.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I'm going to ask a super stupid question. But, I am dumb professor trained 25 years ago, where my idea of data science is I take my little Stata program, I'm running it on my computer, and the data sits on a server. What exactly is Jupyter and DataHub, and what is different between I have my Stata package on my computer and I'm running some data on some server?
Perfect. We should redo our slide to start with this. So there's a couple things to unpack here. One thing that's Jupyter is it's a file type. It's a new type of file that's like a formatted script. So in Stata, you would have a do file that would do some commands. If you wanted to write some explanatory text to remind yourself what you did, you would put a hashtag in your comment. Now what we can do is make kind of a little bit more formatted. And we can do it so formatted that it looks like a pedagogical thing where we're like, hey, class, today we're going to do this and we're going to do this. And here's where the data set's coming from. And then we can put a little line of code in there. It's going to open. An easy way for that to render is in a browser tab. So this is all just going to open in a Chrome tab. If I was working on my own machine, I could just, have it running, but the way I would interact with it was through a Chrome tab, even on my own laptop. Instead of going into that Stata window with like the 4 boxes, I would just go into Chrome tab and be able to do the work there. And I would be able to like make my formatted part, which described the homework. And then there would be a little box, and that box is live code that executes. That little box is like a little subset of your do file that you can just press enter and it will run. And what's nicer than Stata is then when I run my little bit of code, my visualization or my regression output just appears in line. So it's like description, little box of code, and outputs can all be in the same, web page. So that's one whole thing of like, let's think about how to do compute now. And instead of Stata, we're using Python, but we've invoked a Python package that's just going to do basically things like Stata, like read in the data set, run a correlation. Let's just say like those are the minimum things we want to do. Run a regression or do a visualization. Now, what's cool now is there's this thing, the cloud, where there's like, an ability to spawn compute, like for very low cost ephemerally, so that everyone in your class has exactly the same environment as you. So previously, hey, students, go buy a Stata license and install it on your laptop and make sure the files are in the right place and make sure you have the right version and make sure it's compatible with your version of Windows. Or, like you can imagine, like this has been a nightmare for instruction. And in a lot of cases, I would say it keeps people from doing quantitative work because you're like, I got so much to teach. I don't have time for my GSIs to be fiddling with people's Stata installs, right? So now you're like, as an instructor, it's amazing. You distribute just a link, like suppose via B courses, and the students click on that link and this browser tab just pops open. And instead of the compute being on their laptop, it's on, a server somewhere. No one needs to know where. And it's got this like, hey, students, welcome to homework 1. Press this cell and we'll read in the data set. Let's look at which variables we have. And it just starts displaying. So there's a couple things going on. One is that the compute is like taken care of. Another thing that I would pitch to you, Irene, is they made Jupyter notebooks for reproducible science. So people in different labs could send the file around and execute the same code on the same thing and keep track of each other's work, which is incredibly powerful for teaching. So I can be at the front of the class and be like, everyone open the notebook, and 100 people can open the notebook that's going to execute correctly for them and get exactly the same result as me. right? And so as a teacher, that's kind of like the goal. That's like, wow, I can't believe that they figured out all this stuff about packages and versions and which machines. And so for Data 8, they were like, we can't make sure everyone has a laptop. What if you just go to the library and get a Chromebook? This is now going to work on a Chromebook, right? Because the compute's out there in the cloud, not on the laptop. So there's a bunch of stuff around equity and access. There's a bunch of stuff around committing to use an open source stack so that we know that it works everywhere. Whereas if you were Stata licenses, then it's like fiddly getting it to work everywhere. We have a bunch of slides at the end that would walk through that. That was like the quick take. But the way I want this to flow is now to be able to bring David and Joanna into the conversation. But I want to frame it a little bit by saying, you know, I'm going to put 3 types of classes. And what's so gorgeous about sociology is we have these 3 types of classes here. So SOCH 130 AC is a classic module where you're in another class. It's a social justice class. You're learning about neighborhoods, but there's an exercise. There's a project that's done on the DataHub. It's not the core. It's not the core to the class. And this, you know, is probably our favorite module that we've ever done. And they were actually able to pass this off. Joanna did a lot of work with the team to build this. But then I think she passed it to another instructor who then passed it back. So it was like building a nice set of curricular materials in place enough so that somebody else could teach with it too, which is really cool. A second type of class, and this is, you know, this is something that I'm very excited about, is like the core methods class, right? Everyone has to take SOCH 5. Right now we're working, for example, with Poli-Sci 3 and Econ 140. All majors have to take one quantitative methods class. When you can do this with really easy interactive compute, you can give students a quicker on-ramp to have the skills. You know, what's hard is it's not like Stata where it's like very simple to just be like regress X, Y. You have to learn a little bit of Python and get a little bit of the coding mindset, which is more. But on the other hand, it's delivered in a really easy way. I think this is really a path forward towards making sure that, you know, social science students get some quantitative literacy. And then finally, we have a set of classes called connector classes. And the idea there is you're in the main Data 8 class, but you might be interested in sociology or earthquakes or biology or econ. And so there's a connector class that connects to the Data 8 class with the domain you might be interested in. And so that's the Sociology 88. So we have all those 3 types of classes here. I want to start off with what we would call the module, where we're just like plugging a little bit in, and start with Joanna's class. As far as I know, it got taught 4 times before this dreaded pandemic. You know, it's a project. Joanna took a lot on in learning this and working with the team and being able to survive it being fiddly in her class and you know, being revised each time. But it was a really cool example of students gathering data and making a data set for the class. And then the students being able to see their data in the class-wide data set that I think is a powerful form of, like, you know, what we're now calling project-based learning, right? Joanna, you want to take over?
Yeah, I would say that was one of the most powerful things, I think, for the students. So what they did was I assigned them, you can kind of see that map at the bottom. I assigned the students each just kind of randomly a census tract that goes along the number 18 bus route because they could get there on the bus, right? First problem. And then they filled out a common sampling form that was actually taken from this, it was the systematic social observation form from this, the program on human development in the Chicago neighborhood study. So it was this old school kind of thing. They filled it out. And they also did field notes and they took some photos. So that was our class data. And so all that got,
I'm going to jump to the second slide.
Oh,
because
yeah.
This is where we
there it is. You can see that's one page
survey.
of what they filled out.
And then this is really cool where the student has taken a picture and put a little comment in.
Yeah, and that all got mapped. So then the students could look around on the map and see each other's, find their own notes and find their, you know, their classmates' notes. And then you also see on the left, we mapped a lot of variables. So we imported census data into the notebook, as well as the students' data. So for all these different census tracts, they could, look up, like you can see here, bachelor's degree, education level or house value, and we could plot these things against each other and also generate these maps, which I think visually was really helpful for students. Because one thing I really was hoping we could do with this module was to bring together students with very different levels of comfort with quantitative data. I mean, I know that, my SOCH colleagues, we sometimes get students, they see a bar chart and they like want to dive under the desk. And so I was hopeful that, and in SOCH 130 AC, because it's American cultures, we've got people from across the university. So we have some students who are, I had a student one year who was actually on our modules team. He was helping to put everything together and, helping the students in their drop-in office hours that were having trouble and everything. And so I was hoping it could be kind of an equalizer in that way. And so we tried to make the assignment very accessible and easy, actually. That I think that's what made it successful, was that the students, it was kind of you give this your best shot, you make some effort in the assignment and you'll get the points for it. So they weren't so worried about the grade. But we were able to create variables from the students' data. And so I think that they were really interested to see that. We created an amenities variable. I think that's what's mapped here, where we took some of the different indicators from this systematic social observation, and we created a score for amenities within the module. So that could be mapped and then incorporated in these other sort of analyses that the students did in the notebook. And so this was just a drop-in assignment. So it was kind of a lot. It did seem a little overwhelming at times to stick this in for like 2 weeks. And there was some prep involved for the students on what they're supposed to be doing, but I thought this was a really cool idea to be able to do something like this, but I didn't want it to take over my whole class. And so this just subbed in for an additional assignment that I had already done around neighborhoods that just had the students kind of going out and doing some observational field notes. And so I think it was successful in that way. We were able to just kind of do this assignment. And then we moved on, and so it was one of the major assignments that students did for the class, but it was just one part of the class. Yeah, I guess probably the most useful would be if you guys wanted to ask me any questions about this. I'm not sure. Maybe that's a little overview of the project.
I have another question as the person who learned stats way too long ago. In the olden days, right, like you'd need numerical data, or maybe you'd have a label, which you probably are going to make numerical anyways. So I'm really fascinated by like putting on the pictures, putting on like ethnographic field notes and stuff. Given that I don't do Python coding, how does that?
I did none of this. I did none of this.
Okay.
It was, I mean, I got to come in really early. I think I was really lucky because it's like fall 2017. And I just kind of signed up to do this. And then all of a sudden I'm in a meeting with like 5 people who want to just create this cool thing based on my ideas about it. And so I can take no credit for building this notebook at all. Like I did the Python summer boot camp, and I was like having these like flashbacks of like terrible statistics, from grad school. And so I was kind of the idea person. So I actually, you have to gain some facility with it to be able to help students, but we kind of designed it so that the students would just have to run the notebook, and things would they could manipulate variables and kind of change things around, but they didn't have to do any coding themselves. And so it was the team of, the people at first. I think it was the group of whoever came in early and was creating the notebooks. And then later it was more undergrad students who were kind of tweaking the notebook and kind of keeping it going in later semesters. So you don't actually have to know how to do all this yourself, I guess I would say, right, to be able to have it work well for your class.
You come to us with a problem or a data set or something you want to describe, and our students build out the notebook and then come back to you and be like, how does this sound? Does this align with your learning objectives? If we look at this one, these here are like the way students are interacting was just a drop down menu. Let's try to correlate these two variables. I mean, for me, like as a teacher, like just, this is where I learned what a census tract was. How big is a census tract? What does it look like in my town? For me, that's like super useful stuff. And this mapping stuff, like just the fact that this is super easy to generate with free software, like it used to be, you would have to learn ArcGIS and have a special license and and now there's like, free software that anybody could play around with this and, pull census data in and be mapping it with a heat map. It's just really cool, like putting the tools quicker and quicker, the tools can get into people's hands.
Joanna, Armando, I think he by accident just messaged me, but he was wondering what the final product was.
Oh yeah. Well, so the students kind of two things. So they had to collect the data that we incorporated into the module. So that was like step one. So they had to go out and so, that's kind of boring B courses details of how they turn that all in. And then we used Google Forms really to import it, get the data to go into the module. Along with the census data. And then they did an assignment. So I wrote up a series of questions that was really just to explore this module that I'd be happy to share. Like I would be happy to share any of the, stuff that we did, assignments with anybody who's interested. And then the students did that assignment. They turned that in and got credit for it. That was part of their grade. So, and in that assignment, they did a series of questions about the module that were based on kind of exploring the data and explaining questions that they had, and also like ideas they had about interpreting the data and some of the variables that we'd made, and if they thought we'd done that right, so some of it did tap into some, I think important ideas about methods. But I also asked them to engage with the readings that we did about neighborhoods and inequality and how our data from the module could be connected to those readings and those broader ideas.
I'm going to move on. We can come back to this and I could talk about this all day, but just really quickly, SOCH 5, as I said, the required class, everybody that's a social major needs to know some quantitative methods. This was taught twice in 2019, once by Heather Haveman and once by Dave Harding, who worked with the team. And a lot of this is like descriptive statistics, working with data from the General Social Survey, hypothesis testing, and you can just see here's like a data frame read in there. And then this is a way to interact, sort of promoting hypothesis testing through resampling, just as a newer way to teach stats, like, basic stats concepts. Anyways, would love to get back to this project. It's funny, this isn't like a sociology specifically problem. It's something that's going on with econ that I'm trying to work with, where who teaches this class bounces around a lot. And sometimes it's core faculty, and sometimes it's lecturers, and sometimes it's somebody who repeats it, and sometimes it's somebody who just does it once. In some dream world, you would have some core set of exercises that you could hand off from instructor to instructor that would be like related to some core set of competencies. The way UC Berkeley works is we don't hand people like materials for how to teach this class. It's so often like you teach it the way you want to teach it. And there's a lot of like autonomy and independence there. Dave, I don't know if you want to comment on SOCH 5 with Jupyter or.
Sure, yeah. So just for context, especially for non-SOCH folks, SOCH 5 is a method overview course, right? So the part of the course that's actually devoted to statistical analysis is actually only like 2 weeks, and this is what that became. I integrated this in the second time I taught the course, because the first time I taught the course, those 2 weeks where we did quantitative methods were the worst part of the course, both for me, the GSIs, and the students. It was so hard to do something effective in that 2 weeks. And also, you know, I was someone who taught this in the fall, and we have a lot of incoming transfer students, and they've, you know, taken their intro stat class in community college, often not had a very fun experience with it, that coming in. So, you know, we did three lectures using the Jupyter notebooks. And as was said earlier, like, you know, a big advantage of this is how interactive it can be. So you can be standing up there lecturing, and, you know, talk a little bit, but then pause and say, okay, now everybody get in the notebook and do these three cells and, you know, answer the questions, and then let's like kind of debrief. And so that really helped to break up lectures and what would normally be boring. And then I think that the students also did, I think, a lab notebook, or I think what they did was they continued the lecture notebooks in their discussion sections, and then they had one assignment. And so what we really focused on here was kind of revisiting the kind of intuition behind basic statistics, things like sampling error, interpretation of means and medians and regression coefficients, and things like that. So I saw a question. A notebook, yeah, a notebook no longer means a spiral binder. The notebook is the web page that Eric was talking about earlier. That's a notebook, right? It opens up in the tab.
We call them notebook because they have descriptive text, they have code, and they have outputs all together.
And so one of the things, I guess, probably some of the things I learned from doing this that I guess I would pass on. One is that you do really have to think about what role the GSIs are going to play and how comfortable they're going to be with this, especially in sociology, where very few of the GSIs will have any prior experience with this, though more and more have in some way. And so you've got to do a little bit to support them, and then also, you know, be realistic about what you can expect. And I think at the time there was a training that they went to that I believe Eric
yeah, we meet with the team before they deploy.
Yeah,
so yeah, we're happy to help work with your GSIs.
And then often the team comes to the lecture and sometimes the discussion sections as well to assist if there are issues. The other thing I guess I learned, one other thing I learned was that you really have to think about what your pedagogical goals are with this. And that will vary across. So when you work with that team, you've got to be real specific. And so one thing we decided early on was that the goal of exposing our students in SOCH 5 to coding was not the priority. Okay, and so what we did instead was we created notebooks whereby all those coding cells that Eric talked about are actually hidden. You can open them up if you want to see them, and there were some students in the class, you know, who, you know, had taken Data 8 and so on. But and we set them up as kind of widgets, which is what's on here, so that where students could click on different things and, you know, move that slider. They could see how the distribution of sample means would change when the sample size changed. They could, you know, plot different things and practice interpreting them, and so on. So it was. And so what this did was this replaced the kind of thing we had to do before, which is like if you do an assignment, like I think I had them calculate, you know, giving them a table and having them calculate the chi-square by hand and interpreting it, which was, you know, not productive because we just got so bogged down in the details, and the bigger picture kind of got lost. And I guess the third thing I learned is just like how useful it is to work with that modules team, because they'll have experience implementing these sort of things or teaching these sort of things in lots of other contexts, or as students, and also as students in those contexts. And so they have a very good handle on what is going to likely to work and what not, and how, and then also how to structure things so that they work pedagogically effectively.
So just to segue a tiny bit, then Dave, fresh off this great experience teaching SOCH 5, launched his own course.
All right, you want to say anything about connector courses before? Or
connector courses are something that I love, and I love that we have this collaboration with Professor Harding. So the idea is it's like a 2-unit seminar where you can explore things. It doesn't necessarily count for anything, but that gives you a freedom to explore data sets. And we have been able to build all sorts of cool connector courses. So the idea is the students are in Data 8, but they're learning something on the side. You know, there can be history, or there could be neuroscience, or there could be earthquakes. So Dave leaned in. He worked with our team. We had a team working for a while building the notebooks for him here. Dave has some of his own data sets that are like police violence data sets, but then there were some other data sets, you know, standard like national data sets. So really great exposure for a student who wants to do sociology but is interested in quantitative work to see like basically like a survey of different types of projects.
Yeah, so I guess what else to say? The course itself is a little bit, in some ways, different from other connectors in that it's called, the course title is actually called Data Science for Social Impact. So what we're trying to teach students is sort of how to translate the data science skills they're getting in Data 8 or in other settings into kind of the public or policy domain. So the beginning of the course, which actually has no notebooks or anything, goes through what do social scientists know about the role of data and evidence in policymaking, and then we actually teach writing for a policy audience, op-eds, policy briefs, and then we get into, so that's one form of communication. Then we get into like communicating with data, so data visualization, and then the students do a group project that puts all that together, where they're given a data set, some background reading, and some sort of starter notebooks that read in the data set, do some very simple things, and then they build out the rest of the notebook to do the analysis they want to do, write up a policy brief about it, and then write a short kind of policy, what we call policy impact plan. Yeah, so how far, I mean, I think I probably started working on, this is a spring course. I probably started with the modules team the beginning of the summer, the prior summer, but this was a whole course, and there are, I don't know how many, probably 10 notebooks or something in the course.
Yeah,
all with different data sets.
Certainly a semester ahead is key, you know, like that we can work on it for a semester with you before the class launches is a general pathway.
Sorry, just one point. This sounds really exciting. And I'm trying to develop a similar course, but focused on labor. And Eric and I have had a conversation about this already, but Eric, I've been meaning to follow up with you, but this sounds really like along the lines of what I'd like to develop, Dave. It would be great to have more details on how you then provide access to the students to all this data, and how long it took you to actually compile some of this that you have from your own projects.
Yeah, I mean, we used existing data sets that I either had access to or were easily available online. And in some cases, actually the team found the data, like, so for we used this Minneapolis police incidents data. And I said, part of the point of the course was to sort of engage students with data on like very contemporary issues, right? And so I said, well, maybe we should do something on, police civilian interactions. And they went and actually found this publicly available Minneapolis data from their data portal. So finding the data wasn't too tough. The work really comes in, especially if you're doing a whole course, and really planning out like, how am I going to chunk out the course? What are my pedagogical goals? What are my learning goals for each part? How is each notebook going to contribute to that? And then giving the modules team a real set of clear instructions about what you want the students to do in that notebook to achieve that goal. Then they go off and they implement it all, and they deal with all the coding and setting it all up, and come back to you and say, hey, here's what we got. What do you think? And then we tweak it some more.
Wow.
And then there's also, I don't know if Eric mentioned this, there is a connector assistant who is an experienced student from the team who comes in and actually comes to the class and implements the notebooks with the students, often walking them through the notebooks, same sort of way, teach them a little bit, then they go off and work on something, come back, debrief, work on something, the next part of the notebook, and then also hold office hours so students can come with questions as well when they're doing any sort of assignment. One other quick thing I would note about this course, the thing that surprised me as I started teaching it was how much variation there was among the students. So even though you plan the course, a connector course, to be something that simply runs alongside Data 8, which is designed for students who are seeing data science for the first time, and even to the point where you can't start doing anything too complex in the notebooks until the students have had enough Data 8 to engage with that. But I had students, who were taking Data 8 at the same time, and then I had senior data science majors in the same in the same class, and so some of them, went rather quickly through the notebooks. But on the other hand, all the sociological content, all the policy content, all the writing content, especially the writing as a sort of form of assignment, they were much less accustomed to. They hadn't done probably since their first year of college or something.
I want to bring Elias back into the conversation really quickly and just give a little sum up of some of the learning outcomes that we can do with modules.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Also, I know Linus also has a question, so we'll definitely get to your question. Yeah. Okay. At modules, we believe there's high pedagogical value of notebook-based teaching. So this includes having students run their own tests with the data, such as conducting statistical hypothesis testing. Jupyter Notebooks also allow students to interact with widgets that allow them to select their own features or parameters, as we've seen previously, and compare and contrast similarities or differences that they might see within the data. In addition, after having some of these computing tools at hand, the Jupyter Notebook platform gives students the liberty to conduct their own analysis on the data and gather insights they might be interested in exploring on their own. Also, as discussing before with Sociology 130AC module, students can collect their own observational data and be guided through the process of analysis through the data that they've collected. And lastly, a module can even serve as a walkthrough of a research project. So students can go through the methods of the research paper and walk through the data set that's being utilized and see the firsthand applied research methods.
And to touch on Linus's question really quick, and Elias, feel free to jump in as well. We do make modules completely unique for all different types of classes. But on the other hand, sometimes there's a first notebook that's here, this is what it's like to do Python. Here's a table, here's a column, here's how I select a column, and we have some boilerplate, notebook 0, notebook 1, for those kind of things, that can be they're sort of well thought out to be elemental building blocks. Here, if I teach you 10 commands, here's some things you could do applied to your class. So we do have some of that we can, scaffolding oh, I would love it if my students learn these 10 things and then I will take them on the applied project. We do that. We also have worked with global studies and PACS. They have a thesis class where oh, we want our students to be able to analyze a survey. And so we have a few commands that they want to do to analyze a survey. We have a lot on textual analysis. Neither Elias or I are super strong, but previously we've had digital humanities folks as the core staff. We still do projects on it. We can show you examples of Trump's tweets sentiment analysis, or looking at books and trying to use text analysis to chunk up different things in literature. So yeah, there's a lot of those tools. They're super cool. Students respond to them. It's definitely easy to incorporate that text stuff. I think your question is sociological studies that use qualitative information. I would say we don't have that yet, but given the right researcher who's ready to collaborate, we, have the tools to lean into a project like that. there's also something called discovery, data science discovery. Like if you have a project like that, you can sign up and work with like data science undergrads that know those tools, and you meet with them and they can like work on your data set. And so we definitely have a bunch of projects like that with researchers who want students to like work on their textual data. One last thing, we're coming up to the end of time, so I want to get back to questions, but we always like to try and put a student in there. And this is a student who had taken all of these classes and just graduated and just got a policy job. And, you know, gave a great quote that was like, before attending Berkeley, I had little exposure to stats or data science. These courses were essential developing skills I now use in my new career in policy research. This is a, you know, a re-entry student who's a little older, but, you know, has like learning data science skills been a pathway towards, you know, upping their game and getting a policy job. So it's for people like this that we do that we do all this, right? And when people like this are in your class and they give you that feedback, you know, it's really rewarding. So finally, just to pitch, like we're here because we'd love to work with you, Elias and I, and certainly Balaji, if you have technical questions, but on content questions, Elias and I would love to meet with you one-on-one, talk through your, you know, be happy to talk through any stuff that you might bring to the table or like homework sets that you might have existing. You can just email us directly. There's also, you know, places to go online and just sort of explore and look at these. If that's another helpful thing, is like to see the documents and just sort of browse them. You know, there's lots of documentation that we can forward along to you if you want to do more self-learning as well. That's most of our presentation, but we have more that explains about the DataHub, but I think we'd love to just hear from you guys if you had any specific questions or feedback. Armando, you want to tell us about your class? What are you teaching?
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I mean, this is my first time even being exposed to this, but I teach an economic sociology class, and I mean, we do stuff on how like the relationship between value and the pricing of things. So like the housing prices or pricing for art, and sort of how culture and morality matters for that. So I'm just thinking of, I'm just starting to think about maybe how I could somehow get students to, like, I don't even have a data set. So I'm kind of open to possibilities. So that's where I'm at with this.
Great. Well, thanks for that. We'd be happy to meet with you. We'd be happy to, you know, if you want to engage, we could put some students on finding data sets that are useful to you. Linus, you want to say any impressions?
I have to ruminate on my thoughts.
Okay. That's just fine.
This is very interesting.
There's another
I'll be
question from
happy to
Irene
say that
in
this is definitely very, very exciting. And I was so happy. I was somewhat familiar with Joanna's project, and I will continue having conversations with Joanna. Hearing about the other two classes were also, you know, very, very instructive. So I'm going to follow up with David, and of course with you and with Eric and Elias. That would be really super fantastic. I'm already, you know, slated to design a class for spring 2023. So summer is it.
Great. Yeah, Irene had another question in the chat that was like, does this have to be part of a class, or could it be internship or training? You know, that's possible. I guess our objective function, like what we're trying to optimize, is like working with classes and impacting big numbers of students. So, you know, the answer is like yes, but like we're more high prioritizing like, you know, classes listed that might repeat, you know, trying to maximize our impact. You know, could we get students to help you with something, or would this be a way to on-ramp and try it out in a smaller setting, you know, if it's heading towards a class later? Sure, like, you know, totally possible. Students, ask your students, like, you know, a lot of students have been through Data 8, they know about DataHub, they know how to do stuff there. Like it could be like people in your orbit already are already familiar with this world.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, I think you mentioned, Eric, I mean, one of the challenges is teaching assignments that shift and change, and then sort of the number of classes that someone might teach also obviously shifts depending on, you know, if they're having other administrative roles and such. But I was thinking of the work that we do at the Berkeley Interdisciplinary Migration Initiative, where we've worked with small groups of undergrads over the summers, and they've been doing data visualizations for us. And I also work with a small group, just like Dave with another thing that he does at IRLE with undocumented students. And they're precisely the students who often will not come to the quantitative data science classes because they don't imagine themselves as the type of people who do this. And so I was just thinking out loud to myself, or not so out loud, whether it would be possible to do super small little module, like a little bit like what Dave was saying, 2 weeks of what you would do in SOCH 5, just to get them over the absolute fear. And then they could sign up for a connector course like Dave's, which I worry that they might not sign up for. And that was my only thought process.
Yeah, we could help you with that for sure. Elias would know, you know, we could pull stuff that's already built and be like, try this, and then try, you know, like try these 3, or, you know, something like that. That'd be easy to line up. Elias did one. What was the one you did for Poli-Sci 5 that was like a migration one?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. Oh, one was on immigration, and the other one was on civil conflicts globally. And the instructor at the time did not want students to learn how to code. She just wanted them to get some sort of data literacy, you know, interact with the visualizations, compare and contrast, and see like at what point in time, like why do we see this change, this sudden spike at this certain time? And then students can answer that question and think about it in the context of what they've been learning within their own lecture. But if the code cells can be hidden, the code cells can be displayed based off of like if you want students to see it or not, and be able to be interested if maybe they wanted to pursue a data course in the future.
We can pass you the immigration notebook, you know, just to see like something that Elias did on immigration.
Also, I'll add, there's a lot of hyperlinks included inside the presentation. So I believe we have the slides shared with all of you. If not, we'll resend it. But you can definitely see what a notebook looks like how are the students walking through it. I think I even put a link on the chat if you're interested in looking at the Sociology 130 AC neighborhood project. But yeah, I highly encourage you to look through all the resources that we have available and seeing all the cool work we've done.
But I just want to plug that in my class, I know for sure, I'm doing it 3 years in a row. Like I did have many students who said, oh, I was inspired to take another class or look into this more. And I think one thing that I did that you might all consider if you're thinking of doing this, I had to do some of this by necessity because I had no GSI. So it's like doing this assignment and how are we going to grade it? And you got to get the student buy-in. So we made it very rewarding for the students. Like it was kind of the final assignment was very contract based in terms of how we graded it. It was like if they showed that they put an effort in going through the notebook and, you know, kind of telling us explaining their logic about how they were thinking about things, and they'd done the data collection that they were supposed to do, then it was an opportunity for them to actually get a very good grade on the assignment. And so I think that really took the edge off of it, you know, for some of the students that were like, this seems so hard for me. I don't like graphs. I don't like, you know, statistics. I think that made it more accessible for them because they didn't have to worry about it impacting their grade in a negative way. So I would just throw that out there as in the spirit of wanting to diversify who thinks of themselves as a person who can do this kind of work, making the assignment, not really hard might be a way to think about that as well.
I guess I would also add, another onboarding option is to have students come and take the Python fundamentals sequence at DLab, which uses all the same ecosystem here that's being used here, and is like zero stakes. They're just doing it for their own purposes. So if they did that, and then they would, be in a position to start working with some of these other notebooks.
Well, and I also love what Joanna was doing in terms of collecting their own data. Like way back when I taught SOCH 5, I would have them do like little surveys of students on campus. And of course, the opinion on campus probably does not reflect US public opinion. And so I could imagine something really cool where you could use GSS data and then have them compare it to their own self-collected data, just to give some ownership in terms of you too can do data collection and here's what you find.
And they're way more interested in it when it's their own data that they've collected.
Yeah.
That was really interesting to see how they had some skin in the game. They like to see the maps.
That's, of course, my interviews are better than everyone else's interviews, John.
Well, I really want to thank everybody for coming, and I want to thank Joanna and David for talking about their collaborations. And Armando, Annabelle, Irene, Linus, we would love to schedule a time at your convenience to follow up if that's something you're interested in.